So if you want to progress faster in Cell Lemon, there are actually a few tricks that can save you a lot of time. This game looks pretty simple at first, but once you reach the later stages, you start realizing that progression is basically about understanding the rebirth loop. So let me explain the best way to progress and also my personal thoughts about the current state of the game.
First of all,
The early game. Honestly, the first 30 minutes of Cell Lemon are probably the easiest part of the game. Before you unlock your first rebirth, everything is pretty straightforward. You just buy buttons, upgrade your stand, get more money, and repeat. I don't think you really need a guide for this part because the game does a pretty good job at explaining what you need to do. The important part starts after your first rebirth. After you unlock rebirth, you will get a cutscene, and Joe the alien will appear near your stand. Don't worry though, you don't need to keep walking to him because there is actually a button that lets you rebirth instantly. Now what does rebirth actually do? Basically, rebirth gives you investors, and investors are probably the most important thing in your entire progression because every investor gives you a bonus to your lemon selling price. So for example, each investor gives you around plus 1% more money compared to the default price. This means the more investors you have, the faster you progress. The general strategy most players use is just buying buttons until they feel stuck, then rebirthing again. But if you want a more mathematical way to play, I think a good rule is waiting until your next rebirth can give you around 10 times your current investors. Because if you only double your investors every time, your progress will feel extremely slow. But if you wait for a bigger jump, your upgrades become much more meaningful. Another thing you absolutely should not ignore is the Sewer Key quest. This is honestly one of the easiest upgrades you can get, and a lot of players probably miss it. The quest gives another bonus to your investor multiplier, which might not sound like much at first, but when you start stacking a lot of investors, every extra percentage matters. In a game where your entire progression depends on making more money faster, even a small boost can become a huge difference later. So yeah, definitely do the Sewer Key quest as soon as possible. Now let's talk about evolution and ascending. Once you understand how rebirth works, getting evolution and ascending becomes much easier. The biggest mistake I see people making is focusing too much on buying random upgrades instead of pushing towards the next evolution. Because Cell Lemon is basically an infinite loop. You rebirth, get investors, progress faster, evolve, ascend, and then repeat the entire process again. So my advice is, try to ascend as fast as possible. Of course, there isn't really one perfect method because every player has a different progression speed. The best thing you can do is experiment and find the rebirth timing that works best for you. Now, I want to talk about the recent update because honestly, I have mixed feelings about it. If I'm being completely honest, I think the update is actually pretty bad. And the reason is because it feels almost unrelated to what makes Cell Lemon fun. The update basically feels like grow a garden, but instead of farming, you're selling mythical fruits. The problem is, for endgame players, there isn't really much reason to play this update because the entire purpose of it is just giving you a money boost. But endgame players already have huge investor bonuses, so the boost doesn't really change much. And for beginners or mid-game players, I think it can actually distract them from the real progression. Because to make this update actually useful, you need things like auto-eat and good fruits, which usually require higher evolution levels. So beginners might spend their time focusing on fruits instead of actually progressing their tycoon. In my opinion, it feels like an update that doesn't really help either side. Now for my biggest tip, and this might sound controversial, become a pay-to-win player? Yeah, I know that sounds weird. But honestly, Cell Lemon is very similar to games like Pet Simulator X when it comes to monetization. The biggest advantage you can buy is the investor boost. Free-to-play players can only reach around 2% per investor, but paying players can reach around 32%. And that difference is absolutely massive. When your entire progression depends on investor bonuses, having that much extra percentage completely changes the speed of your progression. The other thing that is extremely powerful is the remote button. The good thing is, you can technically get it for free after reaching 1 trigantillion investors. But realistically, by the time you reach that amount, you're already extremely close to ascending anyway. So if you're someone who doesn't mind spending money, these 2 upgrades are probably the most worth it. Overall, I think Cell Lemon has a really simple but addictive progression system. The main thing you need to understand is that rebirth is everything. Don't get distracted by side content. Focus on investors, complete important quests like the sewer key, push your evolution, and keep ascending. As for the future of the game, I hope the developers focus more on improving the actual Tycoon progression instead of adding updates that feel like completely different games. Because honestly, the core idea of Sell Lemon is already pretty fun. It just needs updates that make the main gameplay better. But anyway, that's my progression guide and my thoughts on Sell Lemon. Let me know if you guys are still grinding this game, or if you already quit, because I'm actually curious how many people are still playing after the recent update.